Hey everyone, let's zoom out for a second. We're living in an era where global deals are signed faster than satellite uplinks, where AI runs forecasts on climate and conflict before the press even hears about it, and where countries are no longer just borders, they're nodes in a dynamic, decentralized network of power. And yet, sometimes, a deal shows up on the table that most countries say yes to, and one nation says no. Recently, that nation was India. Let's talk about why and why it might actually make sense. Not every sec leads to progress, and not every sec is resistance. Let's just take a moment here and look at what's actually happening, not what people are reacting to. So the news comes in, India refused to sign a deal that most countries accepted. Okay, but what kind of deal are we talking about? That sips the first question, because depending on what month you sipped or watching this, the context might shift. It could be a global trade bloc that reshapes tariffs, IP rules, digital flows, an AI governance framework, maybe related to autonomous weapons, algorithmic audits, or cross-border data regulations, or a climate-linked investment pact, something tying green funding to structural reforms in energy, agriculture, or emissions policy. The labels change, the game board doesn't sit. The real question is, why does India, a country with rising GDP, tech talent, space missions, a 1.4 billion strong market, keep pausing when the rest of the world hits accept? See, most of these deals are designed like version 1.0 of any big software platform. They look good, sound bold, and get media headlines. But they're often written by and for early movers, countries that already had the industrial advantage, the capital, the bandwidth, and sometimes the authorship. And the answer is this: India isn't being difficult, it's being deliberate. In engineering terms, it's like shipping a product without testing it across all hardware environments. It might run great in the West, it might be scalable in theory. But when you apply it to a country with India's complexity, its diversity, scale, income variance, federal structure, the operating environment changes completely. So when everyone signs and India steps back, it's not rebellion, it's systems thinking. Let me give you a thought experiment. Imagine you're building a Hyperloop system, and 15 countries agree to use the same tube width, pod specs, speed limits. But one country says, wait, our terrain is different. Our energy source is solar heavy, and we have legacy rail lines we need to integrate. Would you call that country stubborn? India SIP's pause is that bug report. Is SIPs saying, this isn't SIPs optimized for my conditions yet. Let SIPs test more. Let SIPs negotiate further. Let SIPs build modularity. Or would you say, that SIP's a useful bug report? So in this moment, whether it's trade, tech, or climate, the refusal isn't a glitch in global cooperation. But India is betting that long-term alignment is more powerful than immediate applause. And it's bold because it's easier to say yes and move on. A sign that one country's thinking not just about the table, but about how the table was built. It might actually be a feature. At first glance, this seems counterproductive. Why wouldn't City join a popular deal? Isn't that alignment efficient? Isn't collaboration the future? Let's start with a simple design question. Who does the deal benefit first? But here's the thing. Alignment doesn't mean progress if it comes at the cost of asymmetric leverage. If the terms benefit already advanced economies more, if the rules are optimized for their systems, it's logical for a country like India to pause. India isn't rejecting globalization, it's questioning the architecture of that globalization. When you really dig into most global agreements, whether they're about trade liberalization, digital governance, or emissions limits, the frameworks tend to be written by countries that already built their systems. These are mature economies. They have universal infrastructure. Their legal frameworks are polished. Their supply chains are optimized. And they've had decades of compounding returns from early industrialization. You get friction, you get policy misfits, you get instability. Now you take that same rulebook, optimized for high-speed highways, and try to apply it to a country where some regions are still building the road. What happens? It's like plugging in a Tesla supercharger into a 1980s grid. Doesn't work. Not because it's bad tech, but because the infrastructure behind it is not symmetrical. So India looks at these deals and says, interesting, but are these rules designed for someone like me, still in build mode, or for someone who already finished the build? And what India is saying is we don't reject the technology, we reject the asymmetry. That SEP's not resistance, that SEP's architecture logic. This is a country that SIPs simultaneously running 3 industrial revolutions. The second reason is a little more grounded. India's internal economy is still maturing. In manufacturing, it's still trying to pull jobs from informal to formal sectors. In tech and digital payments, it's leaping ahead. UPI, Aadhaar, and in agriculture, it's navigating reform battles that go back decades. Now imagine signing a global deal that locks in carbon tariffs, opens up your market to precision-farmed imports, or mandates AI rules you haven't built infrastructure for yet. You risk pushing local industries into a race they're not ready to run. So India is saying, let me build capacity first. Then I'll join your league. This is like SpaceX saying, we still test 100 times before human launch. You don't skip steps when the stakes are national livelihoods. India isn't protecting inefficiency, it's guarding evolution. Let's zoom out from economics and talk about strategy. India is one of the few countries in the world that can talk to the US, Russia, Iran, Israel, China, and Africa, all in the same week. No contradictions, just pure balance of power play. This policy is called multi-alignment, and it's a rare art. India's geopolitical playbook is based on non-alignment 2.0. That's not a deal, that's a structural constraint. Now imagine India signing a deal that locks it into one block, or puts it under the arbitration of a Western-led tribunal, or ties its tech platforms to a single digital standard. The freedom to say yes or no on a case-by-case basis. So when a global deal threatens to reduce that flexibility, India holds back, because flexibility is power. Not isolation, not opposition, but modularity. Just like Starlink works globally but isn't controlled by any one country, India wants to cooperate, not comply. Now let's talk about the new oil data. If you're watching this in 2025, you already know data isn't just analytics. It's currency, it's energy. It powers decisions, trade, surveillance, war, standardized AI audits. And in most global digital governance deals, the fine print includes phrases like cross-border data flows. To a nation like India, that sounds like outsourcing your national brain. Cloud jurisdiction reviews. To the average person, that sounds like regulation. India believes that data generated inside India should be stored, processed, and monetized under Indian laws. Why? Because if data is the new fuel, why give control of your pipelines to someone else? They're building a data stack from scratch, from policy to infra, and they're not willing to rent it out before it's stable. So when global pacts require cloud access from outside, or algorithmic compliance based on foreign ethics, or penalties based on third-party audits, India says, interesting, but not yet. By refusing to sign, India doesn't just delay a deal. It's like Tesla refusing to outsource its battery supply chain. Control means scalability. And finally, let's talk game theory. Every global negotiation is a loop. Version 1.0 is drafted, then countries react, then version 1.1 is created with modifications based on stakeholder feedback. It changes the deal. Well, when India says no, it becomes the highest leverage stakeholder in the room. So by holding back, India forces others to come back to the table and say, its market is massive, its middle class is growing, its digital exports are rising. No deal can be truly global without Indian participation. Okay, what do you need to join this deal? And that's where India wins, not by saying no forever, but by making the next yes more aligned. That's not resistance, that's leadership through architecture. Most people think of global diplomacy like a checklist. Get the approval, sign the deal, join the pact. Is it scalable? But India is approaching it like a prototype. Is it fair? And in that mindset, saying no is sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do. Is it future-proof? Not because you steer rejecting the mission, but because you're reprogramming the rocket before launch. When India says no to a deal, especially one backed by the G7 or EU or US, the usual Western response falls into 3 buckets. Let's now shift to something. Confusion. Why would India walk away from a global consensus? Frustration. This is obstructionist behavior. Assumption. Maybe they still change their mind later. Liberalized trade growth increases. And here's the truth. Those reactions are completely understandable from their vantage point. Because when Western negotiators walk into a room, they usually bring with them a model, one that has worked for decades. That model looks something like this. Standardize rules, reduce friction. Sign early, gain trust. This worked in Europe. It worked in post-war East Asia. It worked because the system was aligned to their architecture. So naturally, when a rising economy like India chooses to pause instead of play, it breaks the simulation. But maybe the simulation is outdated. Picture this like software engineering. Used to have built a new open source protocol. It works beautifully in 80% of the world. And then one giant server cluster, let's call it India OS, flags an error. You think, wait, this works for everyone else. Why are they crashing? But maybe the error isn't zit in their system. Maybe it's in the assumptions baked into your protocol. India SIPs, no, is not a rebellion. This doesn't integrate well with my core processes, my social fabric, or my economic architecture. Let's debug this before we deploy globally. It sets the system's message, saying, it's feedback. In Western institutions, like Silicon Valley, or even NATO, this kind of feedback would be gold. It's how systems become smarter, faster, leaner. But in geopolitics, that same feedback often gets mislabeled as resistance. And that SIP's a lost opportunity. It's rejecting the idea that cooperation only works one way. Because India is not rejecting the idea of cooperation. Take, for instance, a hypothetical climate tech framework that requires nations to adopt costly transition mandates. Western countries say, this is about saving the planet. India says, yes, but why are the funding mechanisms so complex, and why does the carbon math ignore historical emissions? Western response, we are all in this together. Then let SITs design a system that reflects everyone, SIT's place in history, and where we are now. India SIP's subtext. That SIP's not obstruction. That SIP's version control. If your deal works for 20 countries with 20% of the population, but not for one country with 17.5% of humanity, maybe it's time to revisit the architecture. Here's the mirror Western policymakers sometimes avoid. India isn't stop blocking progress. India is offering a chance to make it more inclusive. Because the truth is, no deal about AI trade, climate, or digital flow can be truly global without Indian participation. And that's powerful. There steps also a philosophical difference here. It's not just a large market, it's a systemic force. Western diplomacy often equates agreement with alignment. India sees alignment as contextual, not contractual. And that SIP's a huge difference. Meaning India wants collaboration, not compliance. It's like open source versus closed source development. Use our software,